Hey there everyone, my name is Waffles the Asian Yenbear and I play One Piece here in Japan. In the lead up to OP-05's release in the West, you've probably heard a lot about the new blue and black Sakazuki leader, as he has been a huge part of the metagame here. The aim of the deck is to take control of the board by combining black's cost lowering effects and blue's penchant for returning characters back to the deck. Now, if you're looking to get started playing this absolute asshole, then I'm here to give you my version of the deck, along with some tips and tricks for how to handle each matchup. This deck is a little bit difficult to master, and it's not one I'd recommend for beginners, as a lot of thought needs to go into every move you make. I'll have some other deck builds on the channel very soon, so if you're new, check back in later, but let's hop into the deck list. The cool thing about Sakazuki is there's actually a lot of room for variance depending on your preferences. However, you are going to need 4 Rebekahs, 4 Rob Luccis, and at least a couple copies of Ice Age. I'm running 2. You should also have 3 to 4 copies of starter deck Hina, preferably 4. Rebekah combos with Hina, as you can play Rebekah, add Hina to your hand from your trash, and instantly play her with Rebekah's effect for -4 costs to an opponent's character. The only downside is that you can't combo that with Borsalino, since Rebekah is a 4 cost and Borsalino is 7. That's why you also want to run Ice Age as well. Ice Age is a 1 cost event for -5 costs to an opponent's character and allows Borsalino to bottom deck any character with an original cost of 9 or less. Rob Lucci allows you to recycle your cards from the trash, especially cards you can't get back with Rebekah, on top of KOing 2 characters, if you've managed your cost lowering effects correctly. You're also going to want 3 copies of the new 7C Borsalino. He's great because he's a big body that also bottom decks of 4 costs or less, so you can remove your opponent's characters while building up your own board. Lastly, you're going to want 4 copies of Great Eruption because they add consistency and give you another cost lowering effect. Now, as far as required cards go, that's actually it. Of course, there are some other cards that are really good to have, but it is possible to run a budget version, and I'll mention substitutions when possible. So first, I really like 3000 Worlds in this deck. It allows you to bottom deck any character in the game when you combine it with Ice Age, which gives you a good option against Big Moms, Kaidos, and Gear 5 Luffys. It also fits in nicely with Rebekah, so you can capitalize on the Hina combo with even bigger threats. I run it at 3. Now the substitution is pretty obvious for this one. You're going to want Gum Gum Red Rock, but I would keep that at 2 and up the 7 cost Borsalino to 4, since he is going to be the better option, but you do want the Red Rocks for 9 and 10 cost characters. You should probably also have 4 copies of starter deck Tashigi and 4 copies of OP-02 Suru, as they are the best 2k counters for the deck. However, if you don't have access to them, you also have a lot of other options like these. I personally prefer One-Legged Toy Soldier or Bartholomew, but you can go Kaya or Khalifa if you feel like you need more draw power. Now, Hound Blaze is really good, especially early game. It's hard to deal with an 8k leader hit on turn 3, and you get a free bottom deck. This does tend to become less useful as the game goes on, or at least in certain matchups, so I run it at 3. There's not really anything that matches exactly what this wants to do in the OP-05 set, but the deck can run without it. However, it's only a rare, so I do think you're going to be able to get your hands on them. Only about half the list that topped ran this, but I find Marineford to be a really helpful stage. The extra -1 cost for free can really come in handy. I run it at 2, but you could replace that with something like Soap Sheep, just anything that's going to lower cost. For blockers, I run 4 copies of Sabo and Borsalino, as well as 4 copies of the Rebekah I mentioned earlier. Borsalino is really helpful in the mirror match, as his immunity from KO effects restricts other Sakazukis from Rob Lucciing him. For a budget option, you could try OP-02 Hina, but the difference is pretty noticeable. If you're replacing Sabo, I'd say 2 blockers of your choice and 2 Sanji's Pilafs. Lastly, I run 4 copies of Brand New. Not counting Brand New, there are 31 Navy cards in the deck, which gives you pretty good odds for Brand New. If you choose not to run Brand New, then I'd add 4 copies of Hot Couture Patchwork, which is a new event in this set. Now, tip number 1. You gotta know the decks you're facing and what threats they have. This is especially important for a deck like this, as you don't want to waste something like an Ice Age early if you know you're facing a deck with good 9 and 10 drops. So might I point you to my OP-05 meta-analysis spreadsheet if you'd like to see what the average player ran for each leader in Japan. Tip number 2. Don't forget to use your leader's ability on turn 1 or 2. You'll want to get your trash up to 3 as soon as possible, preferably with a Hina, so you're ready to play Rebekah when needed. Tip number 3, go second. Your deck is about controlling the board, and thus, you want your opponent to play something so that you have something to remove. You also benefit from having more Dawn than your opponent in the early game. Trick. Sakazuki is weak to leader attacks in the early game. If you're facing a Sakazuki player and there's no blocker on board on turn 3 or 4, just go ahead and attach Dawn and swing. You will almost always make them take a life card. Now let's get into the specific matchups. Purple Luffy. This matchup can go either way depending on how well you play it. You need to take control of their board early, and they're going to want to use their leader skill to rush to playing a 5 Dawn character like Captain, Kid, or Queen. Remove that before they have a chance to gain advantage, especially if it's Captain Kid. You also need to keep an eye on their Dawn. The turn before they'll hit 9 Dawn, you need to play a Sabo to stop the possible Kaido KO play because they're going to KO something, then rush in on you. If you're in person, watch the way that they try to plan their Dawn out. If it looks like they're hesitating to use any Dawn, beware. The Gear 5 Luffy or the Kaido is coming. If they swing with their entire board, especially if they swing in a position where you can just easily block it, maybe use some counter cards instead. They're usually trying to bait you to block, so once they play the Gear 5 Luffy, you don't have anything that's going to stop those hits. When it comes to red and purple Luffy, this is actually a very hard matchup for you. As we mentioned, Sakazuki is a bit weak to leader pressure, and the 6k attack leader can really take advantage of this. In order to win the game, you need to focus on applying pressure early and not so much on their board. They don't have a lot of life, so you're trying to waste their hand resources or put them in a position where they just don't feel comfortable going all in. On the other hand, when you're playing characters, you want to be sure to prioritize getting blockers on your board. Sabo and Borsalino are especially helpful as you can block the leader hit and then it goes from needing a 2k counter to only a 1k. You'll also want to save your 7 cost Borsalino in hand as well as something that's going to reduce a character by 2 cost. You need to remove the 7 cost Captain Kid immediately when they play him. If you let Luffy go up to 7k with Kid's effect, it becomes really difficult to deal with him. Once they play him, use your turn to just remove him and swing at characters. Don't overdo it on the Dawn just to get countered. Versus Enel, you have the advantage in the early game, but you're going to lose it once they hit 10 Dawn. The key to beating Enel is to go wide, so you need to focus on building up your board while removing the threats they play like Geratsu. Rob Lucci is going to be a very big help in this matchup. Since they're going to have the 7 cost Big Mom, 8 cost Katakuri, 7 cost Enel, and 9 cost Yamato, you really should hold on to your 3000 Worlds, Ice Ages, Rebekahs, and possibly your Borsalinos. If they keep playing one of those every turn and you don't have a built-up board, you're going to lose. Versus Katakuri, they unfortunately have the advantage. You're going to play this similar to Enel, but Katakuri is able to apply a lot more pressure on your life. I really recommend trying to play the big blockers like Borsalino and Sabo, but this is a really hard matchup on your end. In the mirror match, you gotta be mindful of hand advantage. You're both wanting to do similar plays, so do what you can to reduce their access to removal effects by constantly poking them. If you have the momentum, as in you have a built-up field, just swing with Borsalino or Sabo, the blockers. Make them counter, and just try to keep momentum on your side. Versus Green Uda, you have a pretty tough time. Sorry. But you can win that if the Uda player messes up in the first few turns. Remember that Uda will be able to constantly draw into more resources, so your best bet is trying to get them to overextend and then punishing them for it. You need to remove the Nami ASAP, but if they play something like Usopp or Uda, don't waste removal cards on them. Just swing at Usopp or the leader if you want them to block with Uda. You gotta watch your life total and you have to pay attention to how many attacks that they have access to. Don't forget about Watashi wa Saikyo, or in English, I'm Invincible, which is gonna let them swing with their leader another time. So you need to plan for taking the amount of attacks that you see, plus 2. Versus Purple and Green Doflamingo, you've got a pretty easy time. Dofi wants to hold on to events in their hand, which means that they rely more on the film engine to replenish their resources. You can shut that engine down really quickly and just poke at them to make them use their events. If it's more of a Doflamingo family focus, it's a pretty similar strategy. Just make sure you remove the Diamante, but since it's a 5 cost, that's super easy. The only thing that might give you some trouble is the 10 cost Doffy, but you've got enough blockers to manage that, and again, if you've got the Ice Age and 3000 Worlds, you're gonna be just fine. Queen is also a pretty easy matchup for you. They are very reliant on their blockers to solve for time, but you're going to be building momentum as you keep removing the blockers with things like Lucy or Hound Blaze. Just keep the pressure up early and don't give them time to build. If they get to 10 Dawn and they're not almost dead, then just play it like the Enel matchup. Zoro is also a super easy matchup for you. Zoro's whole stick is just using a bunch of low-cost cards, and that makes removal super easy. You have more than just the advantage here. You have the game handed to you on a silver plate. All you gotta do is just be careful of Rush Zoro and Rush Luffy, also Rush Sanji sometimes, but most people don't run that. But if you are constantly poking at them while removing their characters, you're gonna make them waste their counters and their Radical Beams. If Radical Beam stays at 1 in the West, you should never be losing this matchup. Red-Green Law is a little more difficult than Zoro for Sakazuki, but not by much. Just remove the main parts of their combo so they can never get up to 5 characters, like the Blocker Law and the Rush Zoro. Hold on to your 2k counters for the Rush Zoro, and when you can, just KO the 1 cost with stuff like Lucy. Belo Betty is another matchup where you definitely have the advantage. They want to rush out characters and overwhelm you, but that means those characters are super low cost. Only Inazuma has Rush in that deck, so remove the characters before they can attack with them, and if you survive the first few turns, they're just going to run out of steam, and the game is going to be yours. There's a reason a lot of Rebecca players jump ship to Sakazuki. He definitely has the advantage here, as you can pretty easily just bottom deck the Luffy and the Kyros, which can get around Sabos and Kyros' abilities. Since Rebecca can't actually attack you, you can just focus on dealing with their board. Whitebeard is kind of rare in OP-05, but you do have the slight advantage despite the 6k leader stat. Save the 3000 Worlds and the Ice Age for the 9C Edward Newgate. Borsalino can also work there, but I find it's helpful to use him on the Marcos instead. And I know Blue Crocodile is a favorite in the Western meta, but he's rarely played here, and thus I didn't really get a chance to test Sakazuki versus him, but in theory you should have the advantage. If they send your cards back to your hand, that just means you get to remove things again, so just take this one with a grain of salt, but overall, you should be okay there. And as far as the future goes, Sakazuki gets even more buffs in OP-06, so this is going to be a pretty good deck to invest in if you like the playstyle. Now that's going to be it for me. If you have any questions about the deck that I didn't cover here, let me know in the comments and check back soon for more deck guides. My name is Waffles the Asian Yenber, and I'm going to be king of the pirates. See ya.